Ecclesiastes, though, is fixed upon the existence and joy of God in the life of the believer. And see, Solomon's not talking about progress in science and medicine or any of those things. You can have all of that and be barbarians. Quite honestly, Ecclesiastes is the book that this generation needs desperately. Students of the science fiction genre have long been aware that good science fiction storytelling has a philosophical basis. Whether it be pro-Marxism and socialistic Russian science fiction literature before and during the Soviet Union, Russia, or the pro-freedom capitalist Christian works of Dostoevsky or C.S. Lewis, the fantastical stories were philosophies explored through pursuing their most inevitable outcomes. George Lucas did this with capitalism behind the original Star Wars trilogy, which used the Second World War as a sort of backdrop. Gene Roddenberry's modernistic utopian views flavor the famous Star Trek TV series of the late 60s. Others have used the sci-fi genre to explore emotions and the psyche of man, such as the 2002 movie Solaris, based on a Russian novel exploring the topic of grief. Ecclesiastes is similar to this technique in that Solomon explores the philosophies and ideologies, practices, and lives of mankind from the vantage of the humanist or the secularist. He takes the believer in God on a journey of exploration into a world where God is forgotten or ignored. He traces the paths and beliefs of such people and fully immerses himself into their life under the sun. Journey inspired by the Holy Spirit for our benefit. But warning, do not read and interpret the book of Ecclesiastes without starting in the Garden of Eden, where man fell and brought upon himself the curse of God. Do not interpret Ecclesiastes as pessimistic or negative. Now, I can't warn you enough about this. Even tonight, we're 11 verses into this book. And if you and I are not careful, we will see the book of Ecclesiastes as a pessimistic book, as depressing or negative. But it's not, okay? And so just bear with me if sometimes it feels that way, because I'm struggling from a teaching, preaching standpoint that I want us to do what Solomon has done. I want us to walk out, as it were, out on the philosophical plank of godlessness and feel the dread and fear of life without God before I reveal the end, that we don't have to live that way. So keep that fixed in your mind. I don't want to rob the book of its force and of its power, but at the same time, I don't like leaving people hopeless or directionless. And so the book is meant to be read in full, quite honestly. It's not meant to be chopped up the way I'm doing it to explain it. So if you've heard this sermon, you still don't really know the book of Ecclesiastes, although I'm trying by this message to introduce us to what's happening here. But understand, it is not pessimistic. It is not negative. But it does walk where no man tends to walk. It takes us into the fiery furnace and shows us what life is like without God. So in that sense, it's like this science fiction idea in the sense that It takes philosophies and ideologies and life practices and beliefs, and it follows them out to their future conclusion. Whether you like that or not, you get what you ask for. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But Ecclesiastes, though, is fixed upon the existence and joy of God in the life of the believer. It proves and establishes the true joy of living on the earth by dispelling all of the myths and counterfeits that allure us. This is done through the philosophical experimentation and personal experience of Solomon, king of Israel. Solomon was given the ability, the access, and the acumen to conduct such an experiment and to draw the proper conclusions. Most of us could not run these experiments because we weren't blessed like Solomon. We couldn't buy gold and silver and precious things from all around the world because we don't have the ability that he did. I'm not saying that what he did was right, okay? Neither is the Bible. But the journey, one way or another, included inspiration. And so we're given this account for our own edification, that we could not walk the path. We do not need to experiment with sin and godlessness. We can see it for ourselves to where it leads and how it leaves mankind. With this said, we will see that Solomon spares no mercy in his examination of those philosophies and ideologies that promise us satisfaction and joy, but deliver neither. Quite honestly, Ecclesiastes is the book that this generation needs desperately. This generation thinks that God is an option and has drugged itself with so many options. They need to understand the difference. They need to see how all of these things that we pursue and that seem to promise us joy are in fact an illusion. They're a mirage, whether it be excitement or thrill-seeking, drugs or power, money, and so on. You know, these things promise us pleasure, satisfaction, fulfillment, meaning, but they provide none of that, quite honestly, and leave those who follow their path a wretch when it's over. He opens his book with a scathing dissection of the foundational elements we all share and hold out for some hope of progress, meaning, and happiness, and declares them all empty. Empty. So as we move into our first part of this section, we'll see verses 1 and 2 where the preacher shows us his premise. And I've said this way. This is my interpretation, but I believe you'll agree with me as we move along. Our purpose-driven life is pointless. Our purpose-driven life is pointless. Look with me there in verses 1 and 2. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities. All or everything is vanity, empty, worthless, pointless. That's the word, vanity. So who is the preacher? What is the preacher? He opens with this. He doesn't say the word Solomon. Though technically anonymous, Solomon has historically been regarded as the inspired writer of Ecclesiastes. This is taken from the first verse in the text, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So you and I would jump to that and say, well, that's clearly Solomon. And I think we're right to do that. But this, it's not, believe it or not, it's not exactly that simple. There are indicators in here that cause men to say, well, maybe Solomon wrote it. Maybe a scholar, scribe, wrote it posing as Solomon, as like literature. Or maybe a scribe put finishing touches on it, which is not unusual. Moses did not write about his own death. More than likely, Joshua did. Okay, so Moses wrote, and is credited with the first 5 books of Moses, inspired by the Holy Spirit. But it seems clear that Joshua probably was inspired to fill in a few things before that canon was closed. And that's not unusual to see. And some have argued that possibly Hezekiah or Ezra would have done that here. But we don't know for sure. But there just seems to be, as philologists, language experts argue over the style of the book and so forth, they feel like it could be later. Although I feel like, if you want my personal opinion about it, I think Solomon wrote it. And I feel like that maybe Ezra, as he was compiling the Old Testament, maybe he, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, polished off a thing or two before it was canonized in that way. But I believe Solomon is the writer. That's my personal perspective, but I do understand the arguments. The term translated "the preacher" is one of many possible translations of the word koheleth. Koheleth, a Hebrew term that could be a name, or it can be translated preacher, teacher, collector, professor, philosopher even. So it's that idea of the wise man, the preacher, the man who has done his research. He's learned many wonderful and great and deep things, and he's collected them together, and he is now going to share with you what he has learned. All right? So, and I think that still fits Solomon. I mean, the Bible says that Solomon asked for wisdom, and God answered that and made him the wisest man in the world at that time. And people came from all over to hear his wisdom, to learn and sit at his feet, even as far as from southern Africa. The preacher's premise, what is he trying to say? What does the preacher want us to get? Well, I think he wants us to get this. All is vanity under the sun. All is vanity or empty or worthless under the sun. So just understand what he's saying here. He is looking at life as a mortal. Life lived on this earth, under the sun. We all live under the sun, don't we? One guy said it this way. He flipped it around, upon the soil. That's another way of saying a similar thing. You're not below the soil, you're on the soil. So Solomon says, under the sun. We're living down here. And he's saying everything is just empty. There's no meaning. It's worthless. It's pointless. Everything is pointless. I think this is why, and I know there are drug reasons, there are physical reasons and so forth. I'm not trying to oversimplify psychological health, but I do believe that there's some of the issue going on with suicides, with depression, high anxiety, especially among the young, is a lot of this. Their lives have been told from before they were born. They've been surrounded with this hopelessness that you're no better than an evolved dog or anything else. You don't have a soul. There is no God. There's no purpose to anything. You might as well just live for right now, and so forth. And so there's just this, then life comes in, sickness, disease, war, famine, injustice, unfairness, work, which is just, doesn't go away. And not everybody is a trust fund baby that can go climb Everest and tour the world. No, most of us are going to have to work. Well, why? What's the point? Where does this take us? What do I get for all this? Well, if you notice, modern living gives you none of those answers. Modernism, philosophy, psychology, they do a lot of diagnosis, but they have no answers. And as a result of this permeating our society, many are losing the will to live, the will to go on, a joy about tomorrow. The book of Ecclesiastes deals with that. Ecclesiastes is best read as the recording of the experience of an older man who gained much wisdom through experimentation in order to find meaning and happiness in life. The fall of man in the Garden of Eden is assumed. Ecclesiastes is never far from the Garden of Eden where man fell. It's never far from the fall in Garden of Eden, not the pre-fall Garden of Eden. The author has the means and the access to run his experiments and the humility needed to properly interpret them. The phrase "under the sun" is used 26 times in Ecclesiastes, and when it's taken with the term vanity, which is used at least 30 times, we begin to get the vantage point of the author. Together, from the two terms, we see how Solomon uses them. We may see that the subject matter is the futility, vanity of this life under the sun. In all things we have pursued in place of God. A godless life is a useless life. That's what Ecclesiastes is really saying. A godless life is a useless and hopeless life. That is what he's wanting to say. Or we could say it, I've said it that way, a godless life is a useless and hopeless life. But let me say it to you in the way that Solomon says it in Ecclesiastes, his colorful way of saying it. A living dog is better than a dead lion. How can you not like that? Is it not right? What good is it to be a lion if you're dead? You see what he's saying? This is the futility that life seems to have. You're over here, man winds up boiling himself down to these kinds of contemplations. That a living dog is better than a dead lion. It's like man now groveling in the dirt, in the mud, when he was meant to sit in a palace and to rule as the king of God's creation. Ecclesiastes takes us into that mud and says, you want to know what life's like without God? You feel like you're missing out on something? That there's some good things, some fun things, some exciting things out there that God's holding you back from? Well, let's go for a walk. That's what Ecclesiastes is saying. In today's speech, we might say, what's the point? After all of our motivational talks and sermons, when we have done our self-improvements and determined life's purpose so that we live our best life now because, YOLO. The brutal reality is, what's the point? Solomon is going to tell us, we all die. The grave doesn't prefer anyone. It's like Tolstoy that tells the narrative of the man that was told whatever amount of land you can walk in and consume in walking or running in a 24-hour period, you can own. And so the man, covers an acre, 2 acres, 3 acres, 10 acres, 20. He's like, man, I'm going to get more and more and more. And then he drops dead from a heart attack. So what's the moral? Well, the truth is, at the end, all you need is 6 feet. See, this world, there's so much of it that's a lie. Our work doesn't bring sustainable progress. Our work doesn't bring sustainable progress. Do you see any pattern here? We're not even 11 verses into this, and he's already punched a hole in some of the biggest philosophies of our day. Things that we get up, there are people who get up every morning and look at this. I got to hear this or I can't make it through the day. I got to hear my guru to make me feel better. He's already punched a hole in it. Now we're looking at progress. The God of modernism. Change. If modernism put an altar up, they'd put an idol at the front, and you know what they'd name it? Change or progress. When in reality, it's not progress, it's regress. It's going back into paganism, godlessness. This was the modernistic idea. Things are going to get better. As technology advances, things are going to get better and better and better. But look what Solomon says. What does man gain by all the toil, hard work, at which he toils under the sun? He says it twice. Toil. I mean, there's work and then there's toil, A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea's not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness, and a man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, the ear is not filled with hearing. It's never enough. You never really get anywhere. What's he mean by all this generation goes and generation comes, the sun rises and goes down, the wind blows? What's he talking about here? He's basically saying, you think you're making all this progress? But one day you're going to die, and the sun's just going to come up like it's another day. What progress did you really make? In the first 11 verses, we're given an opening assessment, an introductory preview of the deeper experience that is to come. From verse 3 through 8, Solomon begins by asking his first probing question: what does man gain by the toil at which he toils under the sun? And the question is rhetorical, and the answer is implied: nothing. Nothing. You're not really gaining anything. In other words, after all the work that mankind has exerted, what progress has really been made toward meaning, satisfaction, happiness? Some will suggest that great progress has been made in civilization, medicine, and travel. But has man not progressed in these before and lost them? Was Rome? I tell you, the more I study archaeology, the more fascinated and amazed I am that some of the ancient civilizations were way more modern than we give them credit for. The city of Rome, many of the buildings had hot running water. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, do you know the water to supply these gardens? Literally, they rerouted a river for hundreds of miles. to water the hanging gardens. The pyramids of Egypt. Many of the stone things in South America, the stones are so... We can't get stones that close today with lasers. How did they move stones that were 20 tons and fit them together perfectly? You can't stick a toothpick between them. And yet, all of those now are what? Ruins. We think we're so smart, don't we? We could lose every bit of this. What progress have we made? And see, Solomon's not talking about progress in science and medicine or any of those things. You can have all of that and be barbarians. The Babylonians that's who we're talking about. The Babylonians, they were very advanced, great culture and art and literature. They were also bloodthirsty conquerors who worshipped false gods. So Solomon's talking about what progress have we made in the spirit of man to bring meaning and satisfaction, happiness and holiness, joy. We haven't made any progress there. You say, well, Pastor, how do you know? Well, look at all the false religions. Look at all the philosophies. You say, well, philosophy's done a lot for us. Well, then why don't we keep needing new ones? I don't mean to sound like an imbecile. I mean, I know that philosophy has done some good. As much as, kind of like what they say, even a blind pig finds an acorn occasionally, It's that kind of thing. In other words, after all the work that mankind has exerted, what progress has he really made? Nothing. Number 3, our perspective warrants no surprise. No surprise. See, some will look to the future and they say, well, I know things are not the way they should be. This is also speaking directly to our woke crowd today, and quite honestly, all of us. Modernism, postmodernism, but especially our young, idealistic, woke crowd that's ready to produce utopia by punching you in the face. Did you see that? Recently, just this week, the pro-life picketer out in front of an abortion clinic, he's beat senseless, just for standing outside, holding the sign. Or the priest that was piled on by these beasts. But, the end justifies the means. If we just get to the future, things will get better. It seems like that might have been one of the arguments that Hitler used. Pretty sure Marx used that. We got to just get through this hard time. Will we take so many people's lives and possessions? Utopianism. It's poison. It's poison. Our perspective warrants no surprise. Look in verse 9. What has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. He's not talking about reincarnation or the Mormon doctrine of, I don't know what they call that, recapitulation or something like that. That's not what he's talking about. What he's saying here is, he's saying, listen, you think you make progress, what happens? Your kingdom falls. Another kingdom rises. They think they're something. They build something. They fall. And then here it goes again and again and again and again. What has been will be. Now, why can he say that? Because of Genesis chapter 3. Man sinned and plunged himself and all of mankind under the curse of God. We might as well say that a man could climb out of the great white shark's mouth. We're done. We can build civilizations. We can try to have progress. We can have purpose-driven life. We're sinners in rebellion against God. And we're going to do it again and again and again. What is globalism right now? You know what I want to suggest to you? It's the Tower of Babel. Globalism is the Tower of Babel all over again. Solomon, you're right. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? Doesn't that sound like and I'm not trying to pick on them. I mean, every young generation seems to think that that's part of being young, I guess, but they feel like they figured it out. See, this is new. He says, it's been done already. Don't you love this? There is no remembrance of former things. So what do we see here? We see the preacher forces us to confess that though we often look to the future through rose-colored glasses while forgetting to look backward altogether. In other words, we're delusional about the future and stupid, in the proper sense of the word, about the past. Without an ounce of evidence or warrant, we believe the future will be ever greater until finally it brings us the meaning, the health, the happiness for which we have waited and worked for so long. Solomon says it's a lie. It's a lie. There is nothing that promises us a bright future. Nothing. Now, I told you, Solomon's going to walk you out on the plank. All right? He's going to talk about all the false hopes that we have. And he's going to shoot holes right through them. Though not stated, but possibly implied, we could be so wrong about the future because we are so ignorant about the past. By this, I do not mean that if we learn from the past, our futures will always be better. That's also a myth. But the past that Solomon is referring to is the Garden of Eden. We believe the lie that partaking of the fruit will give us a future that God has denied us. And Solomon is saying, did you forget that? That's what threw us into this mess. And what's his conclusion? Well, Ecclesiastes is best read in this way, as we said. But he says in chapter 12, verse 13 and 14, the end of the matter is this. After all has been heard, fear God and keep His commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So what is Solomon saying? And this is the point of the whole book, although we're going to explore these things in much more detail. But Solomon is basically saying, these are lies. All of these are lies. You want satisfaction, you want meaning, you want happiness and joy in your toil, your sickness, hardships under the sun. You want it to not be empty and useless. Live for God. Fear God and keep His commandments.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to our latest video. Go ahead and click that little thumb so you can like that video, as well as on the bottom right hand corner, click that little bell to subscribe and receive notifications. Thank you again so much for tuning in, supporting our video ministry here at Cognitive Church.